It was a chilly evening in the small town, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional footsteps echoing off the walls. At the corner of the park, near an old, slightly worn piano that had been there for years, a boy stood watching. He was thin and wore clothes that had seen better days. His shoes were scuffed and his jacket looked too big for him. But there was something about the way he stood, quiet, patient, almost invisible, that made people sometimes notice him, even when he didn't want to be noticed. The boy had always been drawn to music. He didn't come from a family with money or a grand piano at home, but he had an ear for melody and a fascination for the sounds that could fill the empty spaces around him. When no one was looking, he would hum quietly to himself, imagining he was playing the grandest concert in the world. That piano in the park, old and scratched, became his secret place. The keys were stiff and sometimes didn't even sound right, but that didn't matter to him. Every note was a story he wanted to tell, every melody a world he wanted to step into. People in the town were used to seeing him there. Some thought he was strange, standing alone in the cold, staring at the piano as if it held some secret he had discovered. Others ignored him completely, too busy with their own lives to notice a poor boy who dreamed of music. But a few, the ones who liked to watch and laugh at other people, saw him as an easy target on this particular evening. A small group of people had gathered nearby, laughing and whispering among themselves. They had noticed the boy before and decided it might be funny to create a challenge for him. Their plan was simple but cruel. They would call him over, make him play a very difficult piece of music, and laugh at him when he inevitably failed. To them, it was entertainment. To the boy, it would be a test he hadn't asked for. In front of strangers who didn't know him, strangers who didn't care, the boy didn't notice them at first. He was staring at the piano, his fingers hovering slightly above the keys, imagining the first note of a song only he could hear. He didn't know the world around him was preparing to turn against him, to watch him stumble and make fun of him. He was lost in the music and the dream of what it could be. "Hey, you!" one of the men called loudly, breaking through the quiet. The boy flinched, looking up. His eyes were wide, nervous, but polite. "Come here. We've got a challenge for you." The boy hesitated. He didn't understand why they were calling him, why anyone cared. He had been ignored all his life, treated as invisible, and suddenly he was the center of attention in the most uncomfortable way. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from a mix of fear and anticipation. He had never played for anyone like this before, never for a crowd that didn't care about him or his music. The group laughed, louder this time. They were enjoying the moment already. One of them pulled out a small notebook with notes scribbled inside. "We want to see you play this," he said, flipping the notebook around so the boy could see. The sheet music was complicated, full of fast notes and tricky passages. Most grown-up pianists would struggle with it, let alone a boy who had never had formal lessons. The boy looked at the sheet and then back at them. His heart pounded, and for a moment he thought about walking away. But something inside him didn't let him. He had spent his life dreaming of music, imagining that one day he could make people feel something with it. This was unexpected, frightening, but also an opportunity. He didn't know if he could play it perfectly, but he knew he could try. "Okay," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the cold air. "I'll try." The group exchanged surprised looks. They had expected him to refuse, to run away crying. Instead, he was stepping closer to the piano, placing his small hands on the keys with a quiet determination that none of them anticipated. The crowd around them shifted, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Some still whispered and laughed, but a few started to watch more carefully. Curious, the boy took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the evenings spent alone, the hours when he had imagined himself playing to a room full of people who understood him. He remembered the times he had pressed his fingers on the piano at home, a tiny keyboard his family could barely afford, feeling the music flow even when no one was listening. Now the notes in front of him seemed alive, challenging him, daring him to show what he could do. He opened his eyes and began to play. The first few notes were quiet, hesitant, almost unsure. The group snickered, thinking this would confirm their plan. But then something remarkable happened. The boy's confidence grew with each note. His fingers moved faster, smoother, and the melody started to form, not perfect, perhaps, but full of emotion, full of life. The sound of the piano, harsh at first, began to fill the space with beauty that caught even the cruelest onlookers off guard. People who had come to mock him stopped laughing. Some stepped closer, unable to believe what they were hearing. The boy was poor, unassuming, and shy, yet here he was, creating music that made them pause, made them feel something unexpected. It wasn't just notes. It was a story, a voice that spoke louder than words. The group that had planned the humiliation exchanged nervous glances. This was not going as they expected. The boy wasn't faltering, wasn't embarrassed, he was thriving. And as they watched, they began to feel a strange mix of awe and shame. They had intended to belittle him, but now they were witnessing something much bigger than themselves, something they hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, the boy didn't care about them anymore. He was lost in the music, in the moment, in the connection between his fingers and the keys, between his heart and the sound that rose into the evening air. For the first time in a long time, he felt powerful. Even if no one else understood it yet. As the evening wore on, more people stopped to watch. Some came out of curiosity, others because the music had drawn them like a magnet. The boy didn't look at the crowd. He didn't need to. He only knew the piano, the notes, and the joy of expressing what he had carried inside for so long. The chill in the air faded for him, replaced by a warmth that came from something deeper. For a few precious minutes he was not poor, not invisible, not an object of mockery. He was a musician, a storyteller, a boy who could transform even the coldest evening into something magical. By the time the last note faded, the silence was almost deafening. No one moved, no one laughed. They were caught between disbelief and admiration, realizing that the boy had given them something they had not expected, and something they could not take away. The boy opened his eyes slowly, looking around at the crowd. He did not smile triumphantly. He did not boast. He simply sat there, quiet and humble, as if nothing had happened. But those who had come to mock him knew better now. They had witnessed a moment of true talent, a spark of something pure and extraordinary. And in that quiet corner of the town, with the old piano standing between him and the world, the boy discovered that sometimes even the cruelest challenges could become the beginning of something remarkable. The next day, the boy returned to the park. The memory of the previous evening still lingered in his mind. He hadn't played just for himself anymore. A crowd had listened, and he had felt something he had never felt before, a mixture of fear, excitement, and pride. But today, the world felt different. Whispers had spread among the townspeople. Some were curious, some were skeptical, and some had come with a different kind of expectation. A group of people had been waiting near the piano when he arrived. They were not the same ones from the night before, but the story of the boy had traveled fast. Some thought it would be funny to test him, to see if his performance was just a fluke. They called it a challenge, but it was cruel at its heart. They wanted to humiliate him publicly. They thought it would be entertaining to see a poor boy fail when pressured. The boy noticed them immediately. Their faces were not kind. They smiled in a way that didn't reach their eyes. They waved at him, teasingly inviting him over. He paused, unsure if he wanted to go near them, but something inside him told him he couldn't back away. If he avoided them, they would win. If he played, he had a chance to show that they were wrong about him. "Hey, you! Come over here," one of them shouted, holding a piece of paper in his hand. The boy walked slowly, his head down, but his heart raced. The paper had music on it, a piece that was complicated, fast, and almost impossible for someone without training. The group laughed as he approached. They leaned on each other, whispering and snickering, certain that the boy would fail. The boy took a deep breath. He looked at the piano, then at the sheet music. For a moment, fear washed over him. He had never played anything like this before. His fingers were small, his training was limited, and the eyes of strangers felt heavy on his back. He considered turning away, but he remembered the last night. He remembered the feeling of the music flowing through him and how alive he had felt. He couldn't let fear stop him now. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. The crowd quieted slightly, sensing that the boy was about to do something. A few people whispered, wondering if this was going to be another failure. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record the moment for laughter. The boy ignored everything. There was only the piano, only the music, only him. He began slowly, pressing the keys with care. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but then his fingers moved faster, more confidently. He remembered the songs he had practiced alone, the melodies he had imagined for years. Each note was precise, each sound full of emotion. The crowd began to notice the difference immediately. The music wasn't just a collection of notes. It told a story, one that touched the hearts of those listening. The group who had intended to humiliate him grew uneasy. They whispered among themselves, their laughter dying down. This boy, this poor, quiet boy in worn clothes, was not failing. He was thriving. Every note he played was stronger, clearer, more beautiful than they had expected. The music seemed to rise above the cold evening air, wrapping around everyone, softening even the hardest hearts. Some of the spectators, who had only come to see a joke, were caught off guard. Their expressions changed from amusement to disbelief. They began to see the boy not as a target, but as someone special. Even the group that had tried to challenge him felt a strange sense of respect. They had thought it would be funny to make him stumble, to watch him fail, but instead he was showing something incredible. The boy didn't rush. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply played as he felt, letting his emotions guide his fingers. The notes rose and fell like waves, each one carrying a part of him, the struggles, the loneliness, the quiet hope that had never left him. People started to stop whispering and laughing. They were listening. They were paying attention. For a moment, the park was silent except for the sound of the piano and the boy's heart beating with every note. Some in the crowd couldn't believe their eyes. How could someone with so little, someone who appeared so fragile, play with such skill and feeling? Others felt a pang of shame. They had come to make fun of him, and now they were the ones learning a lesson. The boy's performance reminded them that talent and courage often come from the most unexpected places, and that judging someone by their appearance could lead to serious regret. The boy continued to play, his confidence growing with each measure. He wasn't thinking about the challenge anymore. He wasn't thinking about their cruel intentions. All that mattered was the music, the connection it created between him and the people around him. Some of the onlookers felt tears welling in their eyes. They had never expected to feel such emotion from someone so young, so seemingly ordinary. Even the cruel group had to step back. They had underestimated him completely. Their faces showed surprise and a little fear, not fear of the boy, but fear of being proven wrong. They had come to belittle him, but they were now witnessing the truth. This boy was extraordinary, and their plan had completely failed. Time passed, but the boy didn't notice. Hours could have gone by and he would have been unaware. He was lost in the rhythm, in the melody, in the power of creating something beautiful with his own hands. The piano wasn't old anymore. The scratches and worn keys didn't matter. They had become instruments of magic, of storytelling, of something that transcended the cruel intentions of the crowd. By the end of the piece, the boy's hands were slightly tired, but his spirit was soaring. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't awkward or tense. It was filled with awe and admiration. People began to clap slowly at first, then more enthusiastically. Some cheered, some wiped tears from their eyes. The boy looked around, calm and humble, not expecting such reactions but quietly grateful for them. The group that had tried to humiliate him looked embarrassed. Their laughter had completely disappeared. They realized that they had learned a lesson they hadn't expected. The boy's courage, skill, and quiet dignity had shown them that mocking someone for being poor or shy was not only cruel, but foolish. They had tried to use a challenge as a weapon, but it had turned into a moment of admiration. Afterward, the boy packed up his few belongings and walked away quietly. He didn't gloat. He didn't seek attention. He simply returned home, knowing that he had stood up for himself in the only way he knew how, through music. That evening he would sit by his window, thinking about the day and feeling something he had never felt before, the sense that his dreams were possible, that even in a world that could be cruel, beauty could exist, and sometimes it could even shine through the darkest intentions. From that day on, people in the town began to see him differently. They didn't all understand him, and not everyone believed he was special, but the story of the poor boy who could play music that touched hearts spread quietly. And the boy, still humble and shy, kept returning to the piano, not to prove anything, but simply because he loved it, because the music was his world, and because he had discovered that even when others try to bring you down, your passion can rise above everything. The next afternoon, the boy returned to the park once again. Word of his previous performance had begun to spread quietly among the townspeople. Some were curious, wanting to see for themselves if the rumors were true. Others had come with skepticism, believing that the boy's talent had been exaggerated. And a few, those who had laughed the last time or had tried to humiliate him, were there to see if they could once again test him. Hoping that perhaps this time he would falter, the boy noticed them immediately, the whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle smirks of those who had gathered. For a moment he hesitated. The crowd seemed larger today, and the air carried a mixture of expectation and doubt. But he knew he couldn't turn away. He had discovered something the day before. The music didn't just belong to him. It had the power to connect with others, to change their hearts, even if just for a moment. He approached the piano slowly. Its old keys looked familiar now, comforting even. He placed his fingers on them, feeling the slight resistance beneath his touch. The people waiting watched in silence, their curiosity and doubt mingling together. Some whispered among themselves, trying not to make noise, while others openly leaned forward, eager to witness the boy's next performance. "Play something," one of the men from the crowd finally said, holding up a small notebook with new sheet music. "We want to see what you've really got." The boy looked at the sheet music. It was even more complicated than the one from the previous day. Notes ran across the pages in rapid sequences, demanding speed, accuracy, and expression. It was almost impossible for someone with no formal training, yet here it was, and he knew he had to try. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He tried to ignore the murmurs of doubt from the crowd, the curious stares, and the occasional smirk of the man who had issued the challenge. In that moment, there was only him and the piano, only him and the music that had become a part of him. He remembered the evenings spent alone at home, the quiet nights when he had dreamed of this very moment, and the way he had imagined touching hearts through sound. The first notes he played were slow and cautious. His fingers moved carefully, almost testing the keys, but with each measure his confidence grew. He remembered the melodies he had practiced on his small keyboard at home, the patterns he had memorized without anyone teaching him, and the emotions he had stored inside. Every note he played carried a piece of his story, his struggles, his quiet hopes, and the dreams he had held on to despite the world's indifference. The crowd's initial whispers turned into stunned silence. Those who had expected a failure were now leaning forward, unable to believe what they were hearing. The boy's fingers moved faster and more fluidly than anyone thought possible. The complex notes that had seemed impossible just moments ago began to form a coherent, beautiful melody. It wasn't perfect in the way a professional performance might be, but it was alive. It was emotional, real, and mesmerizing. Even the men who had tried to challenge him were taken aback. Their plan to humiliate him had completely failed, and now they found themselves watching someone who was far beyond their expectations. There was a quiet tension in the air, a mixture of disbelief and admiration. They had thought that the boy's poverty, his shyness, and his lack of formal lessons would hold him back. But every note he played proved them wrong. The boy didn't notice the crowd anymore. He didn't notice the judging eyes or the whispers of doubt. He was lost in the music, in the way the keys responded to his fingers, in the sound that rose and filled the park. He could feel the rhythm, the flow, and the emotion that had been inside him for so long. With each note, he felt lighter, freer, as if the music carried away the weight of his life's struggles. Even if just for a few minutes, the spectators began to react differently now. Some were leaning in, eyes wide, unable to look away. Others were whispering to their neighbors, sharing their surprise and admiration. People who had doubted him or intended to laugh were now completely captivated. The boy's performance had transformed the air around the piano. It had become something sacred, something unexpected, something that could not be ignored. The complexity of the music did not intimidate him. Instead, it seemed to challenge him in the best way possible. His hands moved with precision, yet there was a softness to the sound, a subtle emotion that touched each listener differently. Those who had come to mock him now felt a quiet shame. They had underestimated him. And the lesson was clear: talent and courage often came from places they would have never imagined. As he continued, the boy began to add his own feeling to the piece. He didn't follow the sheet music exactly. He let his heart guide his fingers. The melody rose and fell, weaving a story that the crowd could feel but not entirely understand. Some felt sadness in the slower passages, some felt hope in the lighter ones, and others felt awe in the way the boy's music seemed to fill every corner of the park. For a few moments, time seemed to stop. People forgot why they were there, forgot their doubts and judgments, and simply listened. The boy's music became a bridge between him and the world, between his quiet, hidden life and the people who had only seen him as poor or shy. For the first time, the crowd understood that talent could not be measured by appearance or circumstance, and that true beauty often came from the most unexpected sources. Even the cruelest of the group could not look away. Their faces betrayed a mixture of shock and respect. They had wanted to humiliate him, to prove that he was weak or incapable, but the boy had not only survived their challenge, he had transformed it into a moment of wonder. Every note he played was a reminder of resilience, of courage, and of the power of pursuing something purely because it brings joy and meaning. By the time the boy reached the final measures, his fingers were moving with a quiet confidence. The music swelled, carrying both the intensity and the gentleness of his story. The crowd held its breath, captivated, not wanting the moment to end. And when the last note rang out, the silence that followed was heavy, not with awkwardness, but with awe. Then, slowly, people began to clap. At first, it was quiet, hesitant, almost unsure, but it grew quickly into a wave of applause. Some cheered, some whistled, and a few even wiped tears from their eyes. The boy looked up from the piano, calm and humble. He didn't smile proudly or boast. He simply nodded slightly, acknowledging the crowd while remaining true to himself. The men who had intended to humiliate him looked embarrassed. They had misjudged him completely, and now they could only watch as others celebrated what they had tried to tear down. The lesson was clear: cruelty and mockery often backfire, and true talent and passion can shine even under the harshest scrutiny. After the crowd slowly dispersed, the boy remained by the piano for a few more moments. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the vibrations, the echoes of the music that had filled the park. He didn't play for anyone now. He played for himself, savoring the connection he had felt, the joy of creation, and the quiet triumph that came from standing up to doubt and cruelty through something he loved. Walking home later that evening, the boy felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced before. He had faced fear, he had faced judgment, and he had faced cruelty, and he had done more than survive. He had shown his strength, his heart, and his gift to the world. And even if no one remembered his name, even if the town only spoke of him in whispers, he knew that he had grown in ways no one could take away. The story of the boy. And the piano began to spread further after that day. People talked about him not as a poor, shy boy, but as someone extraordinary. They shared stories of the music he had played, the way it had touched their hearts, and the courage it had taken to stand before others, knowing they had intended to humiliate him. And the boy continued to play, quietly, humbly, and passionately, discovering in each note the power of his own spirit. The following day, the park seemed quieter than usual, but the boy knew better. Word of his previous performances had begun to spread farther than he expected. People whispered about the shy boy who could play music that touched hearts, about the way he had turned mockery into admiration, and about the courage he had shown under pressure. Today, a larger crowd had gathered. Some came out of curiosity, some with skepticism, and others with intentions that were not entirely kind. A few men, clearly the same group who had attempted to humiliate him before, were waiting near the piano. This time they had a plan to challenge him further. They had carefully prepared a piece of music that was extremely difficult, full of rapid sequences, tricky rhythms, and unexpected notes. Their goal was cruel. They wanted to see him fail publicly. To them, this was entertainment, a way to regain their pride after being humbled the previous days. The boy arrived quietly, carrying only himself and his small sense of determination. He noticed the crowd immediately. Their eyes were curious, doubtful, and sometimes mocking. Yet there were others in the crowd who had begun to admire him quietly, those who had been captivated by the beauty of his previous performances. The air was a mixture of tension and anticipation. The boy paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew that no matter what happened next, he could not back down. The men called him over, waving the sheet music in the air. "This is your challenge," one of them said loudly, smirking. "We'll see if you're really as good as people say." The boy looked at the sheet music. The notes twisted and tangled on the page, seemingly impossible to play for someone without formal training. But he didn't hesitate. He had faced fear before, and he knew that the only way forward was to play. He stepped toward the piano, his hands hovering above the keys. For a moment, the crowd held its breath. Some people whispered to each other, predicting a failure, while others silently hoped the boy would succeed. He closed his eyes, shut out the world, and let the music flow through him. The first notes were careful, quiet, almost questioning. But as he continued, his confidence grew. With every note, his fingers moved faster, more precise, more expressive. The melody began to emerge, not perfect in a technical sense, but full of feeling and life. The crowd could not believe what they were hearing. The complexity of the piece, the speed of the sequences, and the emotion in the boy's playing created a harmony that seemed almost impossible. The music carried a story, one of struggle, hope, and quiet determination. The men who had planned to humiliate him shifted uncomfortably. Their smirks faded as they watched, realizing that their cruel plan was failing. The boy was not stumbling. He was not faltering. Instead, he was commanding the piano with a strength and skill that no one had anticipated. Each note seemed to echo beyond the park, touching the hearts of everyone who was listening. Some people in the crowd began to feel a mix of awe and regret. They had judged him by his appearance, by his poverty, and by his quiet nature. They had doubted him, thinking that he could not possibly achieve what they were witnessing. But now it was impossible to ignore the truth. The boy was extraordinary, and the music he created could not be denied. Even as he played, he was not performing for the crowd. He was performing for himself, for the music, for the feeling that had always driven him. The notes carried his story, the long hours of practice in a tiny, dimly lit room, the moments of loneliness when he had no one to share his dreams with, the quiet hope that had never left him. Each note was a testament to his courage, his resilience, and his love for music. The crowd grew larger, more attentive. Some people who had come with doubt were now captivated. They whispered to each other in amazement, watching as the boy transformed a cruel challenge into a beautiful performance. The music filled the air, and for a moment it seemed as if the park itself had changed. The coldness of the day, the skepticism of the crowd, and even the intentions of those who sought to humiliate him, could not touch the power of his music. The boy's hands moved faster and more confidently now. He was not just following the notes. He was creating his own expression within them. The melody rose and fell like waves, sometimes soft and tender, sometimes strong and commanding. People began to feel emotions they did not expect: sadness, hope, wonder, all woven into the music. Those who had come to mock him now found themselves silently cheering, caught in the magic of what he had created. The men who had planned the challenge looked increasingly uncomfortable. They had underestimated him completely. Their cruel intentions had backfired in the most extraordinary way. Instead of humiliation, the boy had created admiration and respect. Their own pride felt small compared to the courage and talent that stood before them. As he reached the climax of the piece, the boy's fingers flew over the keys with precision and passion. Every note was deliberate, every movement filled with emotion. The music carried the story of a boy who had faced fear, doubt, and cruelty, yet had not only survived, but triumphed. The crowd was completely silent, holding its breath, not wanting the moment to end. Finally, the last note rang out, lingering in the air like a soft echo. The boy lifted his hands from the keys and looked up at the crowd. There was no arrogance in his expression, no desire for praise. He simply stood, calm and humble, as the audience slowly erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming. People cheered, clapped, and even whistled in admiration. Tears glistened in some eyes. The men who had tried to challenge him looked embarrassed, their faces red with shame. They had sought to humiliate him, but now they could only watch as others celebrated the boy's talent and courage. The lesson was clear. Cruelty and mockery could never diminish someone who had true skill, determination, and heart. After the applause faded, the boy packed up his few belongings and quietly walked away from the piano. He didn't speak, didn't boast, didn't ask for recognition. He simply walked home, carrying a quiet sense of accomplishment and inner peace. He had faced the cruelest challenge yet and had turned it into a moment of beauty. The park returned to its usual calm, but something had changed. The people who had witnessed the boy's performance would not forget it. They had seen something rare, something powerful, and something deeply human. The boy's story began to spread farther, not as a tale of failure or humiliation, but as a story of courage, talent, and resilience. For the boy, the music was more than notes on a page. It was freedom, expression, and connection. It was a way to rise above the cruelty and doubt that sometimes came from the world. Each performance was not just for the crowd, but for himself, a way to prove that passion and perseverance could overcome even the harshest challenges. Even the next day, people would still talk about the performance. Some would speak of it with awe, others with disbelief. But the boy didn't care about the gossip or recognition. He cared about the music, about the feeling it brought, and about the quiet knowledge that he had faced cruelty with courage and had turned it into something extraordinary. As he returned to the piano again in the evenings, he played not for anyone else, but for the joy and solace it gave him. The piano, once old and forgotten, had become a bridge between him and the world, a way to express the emotions that had always been inside him. Each note told a story, each melody carried hope, and each performance reminded him and everyone who listened that even in the face of cruelty, beauty and courage could shine through. The next evening, the park was alive with quiet anticipation. Word of the boy's talent had spread even further, and people from different parts of the town had begun to gather. Some came because they had heard rumors of his incredible skill, some because they were curious, and others because they wanted to see if the stories of the boy who turned cruelty into beauty were true. The boy noticed the crowd, their eyes fixed on him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and wonder. He approached the old piano, its keys slightly worn and faded, but familiar and comforting to him. The boy carried no sheet music this time. He didn't need it. Over the past few days, he had proven to himself and others that the music came from inside, that it did not need notes on paper to be real. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between him and the world, a way to share what he had carried inside for so long. As he settled onto the bench, the crowd held its breath. There was an unusual silence in the park, as if even the air had paused to listen. The boy placed his fingers lightly on the keys, feeling their texture beneath his touch. For a moment, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember all the hours he had spent alone with music, nights when he dreamed of performing, days when he imagined touching hearts he had never met, and moments when he had faced judgment, poverty, and loneliness. All of it led to this moment. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and hesitant, floating gently into the evening air. But with each passing second, the music grew in strength and confidence. The melody carried the weight of his story, the struggles he had faced, the quiet hope that had never left him, and the courage it took to stand up when others tried to bring him down. The crowd, large now and tense with anticipation, began to listen differently. This was not a performance for fame or recognition. This was the boy expressing the truth of his life through sound. Those who had come to mock him in the past watched in silence, unable to find a word to say. The music he created was so alive, so real that it demanded attention. It told a story of resilience, of talent that could not be crushed, and of a spirit that refused to be defeated. People who had doubted him now felt something they had never expected: respect, admiration, and even a touch of awe. The boy's fingers danced across the keys with a mix of precision and emotion. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft and tender, sometimes strong and commanding. The crowd could feel the music in their hearts as much as in their ears. They didn't just hear the notes, they felt them. Some people's eyes glistened with tears, while others clasped their hands together in wonder. The boy was no longer just a poor, quiet child. He was a storyteller, a creator of emotions, a young musician who had transformed ridicule into beauty. Even those who had plotted to humiliate him felt a shift within themselves. They had tried to turn cruelty into entertainment, but instead they were witnessing the raw power of talent and courage. The boy's music was not only technically impressive, but also deeply moving. Every note seemed to speak of patience, perseverance, and the kind of bravery that comes from never giving up, even when the world seemed stacked against you. As the piece progressed, the boy added subtle variations that came entirely from his heart. He didn't follow any sheet music. He played intuitively, letting the emotions guide his fingers. The melody was no longer just a song, it had become a story. A journey that took the listeners through sorrow, hope, struggle, and triumph. People were completely captivated. They leaned forward, silent, hanging on every note. The air seemed to vibrate with the music, carrying a sense of magic that was impossible to ignore. The boy's performance reached its peak. A moment where speed, precision, and emotion all converged. His fingers moved with astonishing agility, creating patterns and sequences that seemed impossible for someone his age and background. Yet there was no arrogance in his playing, only honesty, only a desire to express what he had carried inside for so long. It was as if every note carried a piece of his soul, and the crowd could feel it, understand it, and respond to it in ways they had never imagined. When the final note rang out, there was a brief moment of silence, a collective pause as everyone absorbed what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the crowd erupted into applause. It began quietly, hesitant at first, and then grew into a wave of sound that shook the quiet evening air. People cheered, some stood up, others clapped so hard that their hands hurt, and many could not hide the tears welling in their eyes. The boy looked up from the piano, calm and humble, his face showing neither pride nor arrogance. He simply nodded slightly, acknowledging the crowd without needing to say a word. The men who had planned to challenge him, to mock him, stood frozen. Their faces were red with embarrassment and disbelief. They had intended to humiliate him, but now they could only watch as he received admiration, respect, and even love from everyone present. They had underestimated him, misjudged him, and had been shown the power of talent, courage, and heart. The lesson was unavoidable. Cruelty cannot triumph over passion, and judgment based on appearance. All wealth is meaningless when faced with true ability. After the crowd had calmed and slowly begun to disperse, the boy remained by the piano for a few moments. He ran his fingers gently over the keys, feeling the vibrations and the echoes of the music he had just created. He didn't play for anyone now. He simply played for himself, for the joy it gave him, and for the quiet sense of accomplishment that came from rising above fear and cruelty. For the first time he felt fully seen, not for what he lacked, but for what he could give to the world. As he walked home that evening, he felt lighter than he ever had. The fear of judgment, the sting of mockery, and the weight of poverty felt smaller, almost insignificant. He had proven something not only to the world, but also to himself. That talent, courage, and passion could overcome even the harshest challenges. That evening he would sleep peacefully, knowing that the music inside him had reached hearts, changed minds, and touched souls. Over the next days, the boy's story spread throughout the town. People told tales of the poor, shy boy who had amazed everyone with his piano, of the way he had turned cruelty into admiration, and of the courage it had taken to perform when the odds were stacked against him. Some came to see him, some came to listen quietly from afar, and some simply carried the story with them. Inspired by what they had heard, for the boy, none of the attention mattered. He continued to visit the piano every evening, playing because he loved it, because it gave him peace, and because it allowed him to express what words could not. Each note, each melody, each pause was a reflection of his journey, his struggles, his hopes, and his triumphs. And with every performance, he reminded himself and the world that true beauty and strength often come from unexpected places, and that courage is shown not in avoiding fear, but in facing it with heart. The boy never forgot the faces of those who had tried to mock him, nor did he hold anger toward them. Instead, he saw them as part of the story, the challenge, the doubt, the expectation, and the triumph. Their cruelty had become a part of his journey, a catalyst that allowed him to shine even brighter. In that he found understanding, empathy, and even a quiet sense of forgiveness. In the end, the old piano in the park was no longer just a piece of wood and keys. It had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of following one's passion despite all odds. It had become a witness to a boy's quiet determination and the unexpected way he could inspire, move, and transform the hearts of everyone around him. And the boy, small and unassuming in appearance, walked away that evening knowing something powerful, that no matter what challenges or cruel intentions the world might throw at him, his music, his heart, and his courage would always rise above. His story was no longer just his own, it belonged to everyone who had listened, believed, and been touched by the magic of his music.